Have two or three little short ones here this morning. They don't do this anymore, but waiting and watching the cop on a busy street crossing, the cop stopped the flow of traffic and shouted, "Okay, pedestrians." Then he'd slow the traffic to pass. He'd done this several times, and Patty still stood on the sidewalk. After the cop had shouted, "Pedestrians," for the 10th time, Patty went over and talked to him, and he said, "Isn't it about time that you let us Catholics across?" Gallagher opened the morning newspaper, and he was dumbfounded to read in the obituary column that he had died. He quickly phoned his best friend, Finney. "Did you see the paper?" said Gallagher. "They say I died." "Yeah, I saw it," Finney said. "Where are you calling from?" An Irish priest was driving down to New York and gets stopped for speeding in Connecticut. The state trooper smells alcohol on the priest's breath and then sees an empty wine bottle on the floor of the car. He says, "Sir, have you been drinking?" "Just water," says the priest. The trooper says, "Then why do I smell wine?" The priest looks at the bottle and says, "Good Lord, he's done it again."
As Jim suggested, our speaker really doesn't need any introduction. But I think his subject does. You know, I've been here about 5.5 years, been to Yellowstone about 4 times. I know they got hot springs. I know they got geysers. I know they got wild animals. I know from our talk a few weeks ago that we've got all these strange rocks that are formed underneath the hot springs. But I never heard about fossil forests. So that's what Lee's going to talk about today. Go for it, Lee.
All right, thank you. Can everybody hear me okay on that end, James, in the country club?
Yeah, we're good.
All right. Hey, that was a perfect introduction to my talk. Most people are not aware of Yellowstone's fossil forests, so you're going to get a belly full of it today. This is based on my 17 years of exploring Yellowstone. I spent anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks each summer or fall in the backcountry of Yellowstone, exploring it extensively, taking pictures with my big camera. So I became aware fairly early on of this very special nature of geology in Yellowstone that most people are not too aware of. So here's what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to give you an introduction, a brief one, and then we're going to talk about the geology, how Yellowstone fossil trees came into being. Then we're going to delve into the human history of people appreciating the fossil forests of Yellowstone. And then I'm going to tell you where the fossil trees are today if you want to hike to them. And then we're going to finish up with a picture gallery with some of the beautiful fossil trees there, and then a postscript. So we'll get going. Everybody knows that Yellowstone is famous for its geothermal activity. Springs on the left there, the geysers that sprout, the fantastic Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone. And of course, people go to the park to see all the wonderful wildlife, the American bison, the wolves, the grizzly bears. Very few people are aware that Yellowstone National Park has some of the most fantastic petrified trees in the world. You're probably familiar that the petrified forest in Arizona has quite a few fossil trees, and you see 3 pictures of it there in the screen, but you'll notice they're all laying down. What's so special about Yellowstone is that the trees are not going to be laying down, as you'll see. Why is it that most fossil trees throughout the world are laying down? Well, it's usually the result of floods and pyroclastic flows from volcanoes that tend to knock trees down. But as we'll see, Yellowstone had a very unique volcanic history. Most of the fossil trees in Yellowstone are still standing upright. I've only heard of one other place in the world where this is true, and it's certainly not as extensive as, as you can find in Yellowstone. So it was very early on, the geologists realized that the fossil forests of Yellowstone are, quote, not only more extensive in area, but the trees are almost all standing upright in the exact position in which they grew originally. Many rise to heights of 20 or 30 feet. And so this was noted as early as the 1880s and 90s. So let's back up and look at some basic geology. If you look at the insert on the left, the Earth can be hypothesized as something like an orange or an apple with a thin crust, and inside it's much more fluid and and plastic. Underneath Yellowstone, pardon me. Underneath Yellowstone is a very hot plume of magma that gets up to within 2.5 miles of the Earth's surface. When you consider that the Earth has a diameter of 4,000 miles, that the hotspot is only 2.5 miles below the surface, you realize it's very, very close. And so this hot magma is really the driving force. And Yellowstone is believed to be where a hotspot has been continually poking up to the Earth's crust. Geologists believe in the tectonic plate movement of the crust over the mantle. And so over the many millions of years, the crust has been punctured by the uplift from this magma dome underneath. And these punctures have created various periods of volcanism. And the fossil trees were created anywhere from 50 to 65 million years ago during the Cenozoic area, and in specific the Eocene period, which is a subdivision of the Cenozoic. The Eocene vegetation had very large trees, much warmer climate. It had trees like redwoods, maples, sycamore, chestnuts, dogwood, and so on. And this was a result of very wet conditions, up to 60 inches of rainfall, more or less a tropical or kind of a rainforest effect during this time period. Surprised with the stone fossil trees that there are a lot of imprints of a lot of the other plants that were growing during that time period. Well, the Eocene volcanism produced three kinds of outflow, but it it was more predominantly the third one that we'll talk about here. Volcanoes produce either or all of the above: lava, ashfall, and pyroclastic flows in various amounts. You probably are familiar with the lava that is now overrunning an island off Spain, destroying buildings. The ashfall rains down from many volcanoes, like that's what buried the people in Pompeii, Italy. But the pyroclastic flows were the significant factor in creating the fossil trees. And we'll see a few pictures more and go into more detail about the pyroclastic flows. So here's a map of Yellowstone Park. I'm presuming that most people in the senior forum have been to Yellowstone once or more often. And basically the Yellowstone is almost a rectangle, not quite. And it has like a figure 8 of roads in the middle. And it's served by 5 spur roads coming in from the 5 entrances. So with that as your reference, if you look at this picture, here's a geologic colored map. The western boundary you see there in the yellow, those are the Eocene volcanic deposits. On the eastern edge of the park, you have the Absaroka Range, and on the north end of the park, you have the North Gallatin Range. So all those yellow parts are where you'll find the fossil trees. The center part, the more pinkish part there, that's the much younger volcanic effects. The caldera and the rhyolite there is all much newer in terms of geologic age, like less than 1 million up to more than several million years old. So if you look on this map not only shows the where the fossils are found, it's also where all the basic fossil trees are. The blue and the green and the tan there on the eastern and boundary and up toward the north. And also take a look way up there in the northeast corner where it kind of bulges out in the the northwest corner up there. We'll get to that. That has some really fantastic fossil trees. So in all of those areas that you see are colored, has the potential for finding these kinds of deposits. So these pyroclastic flows come out and spew a cement mixer full of hot gases and ash and stones and debris. And these deposits came out in, they say, 27 different volcanic eruptions over a 20,000 year period, which is a relatively short period in geologic time. And in the Yellowstone area, when these volcanoes were spewing, and it was more than one volcano there along the Absaroka Range, this running terrain was more level than it is now because it's quite mountainous now. So here's a photograph on the left of the volcanic pyroclastic flows coming down off of Mount St. Helens. As I said, these pyroclastic flows, they're extremely deadly. They're super hot. They're filled with gases like sulfur dioxide and carbon dioxide. They're filled with ash and stones and rocks. To be engulfed in one of these pyroclastic flows, you're dead in a minute or two. They're extremely powerful. You notice, look on the right-hand side there. They're powerful enough to just level forests for many, many miles. So, really understand and look at the power of pyroclastic flows when Mount St. Helens blew up. And those flows killed a number of people that were unfortunate to be close enough. Mexico has a number of volcanoes. And over the years, Mexican scientists have found that the forests regenerate in a relatively quick time, geologically speaking. The forest can reclaim a landscape devastated by a volcanic eruption in as little as 200 years, and the forest can come to maturity and grow these huge multi-foot diameter trunks in even less than 1,000 years. Let me go back to that. Krakatoa erupted in the 1880s. It was an island in the Pacific. It was one of the largest volcanic eruptions in modern times. And now there are lots of Krakatoa are showing revegetation. So it's been interesting how quickly the landscape can bring plant life back after volcanic eruptions basically obliterate all living things. So the Absaroka volcanics along the eastern rim of Yellowstone are very evident. And if you care to look, you'll notice in the lower left corner of this picture right here, you'll see a layer here. And if you look in the background, you'll notice some horizontal layering. All of that is from these pyroclastic flows that deposited these layers. And here's another mountain a little closer called Cutoff Mountain. And again, that shows that horizontal layering. All of what you've seen there was deposited from volcanic eruptions. Here's one more mountain in Yellowstone called the Thunderer, where you can see some of the horizontal layering. And here's an up-close picture called Recherche Falls. You can see each layer was deposited. Those are about 5 to 10 feet to 15 feet deep. Each one of those represents one of those volcanic eruptions. So it's very obvious, all the layering, all the times that the volcanoes blew up. Well, the putrefaction process, is a chemical process that works very slowly with precise temperature and pressure and chemistry to turn the organic molecules into precipitated minerals, basically a solid kind of material. And the slower the process, the more effective it is. There are actually some petrified trees in Yellowstone where if you take a really thin slice, I don't know if you know this, but if you slice a rock thin enough and have a bright light behind it, you can actually shine a light through it and look at the cellular structure. So this is actually a picture, not of a living tree, but of a fossilized tree. And all of those, you're basically looking at rock there, which shows the cells actually were replaced by solid material. And you can even see the effect of the rings in the fossilization process. If you look at those three pictures there, you can see, and those are all of petrified wood, you can see the ring formations quite clearly. So that process really preserves the structure of the tree in a very clear and definite way. I think it's kind of neat. So let's step back and take a look at the human history. Native Americans have been using the Yellowstone Plateau for many thousands of years. But we'll go to the more immediate time. The Bannock Indians of Idaho would cross the Yellowstone Plateau to go to the buffalo grounds of the Yellowstone River country. And so Jim Bridger, one of the famous scouts of the American West, said that he heard a Crow legend about a Crow medicine man who supposedly cursed the mountain and everything turned to a petrified state and was frozen in time. The mountain men really did traverse the Yellowstone Plateau, but since they were looking for furs, they weren't really that interested in the geology of it. But they were some of the earliest white men to see all of the geothermal effects and probably the fossil trees. Well, back to Jim Bridger again, he was a famous teller of tall tales, and this was really a form of entertainment to see who could make the most humorous tale. And here's one of them that was repeated by General Nelson Miles. Around a campfire, one of the trappers said to Bridger, "Jim, were you ever down to Zuni?" Meaning the Zuni Indians down in Arizona. And Bridger replies, "No, there aren't any beaver down there." And the fur trapper replies, "But Jim, there are some things in this world besides beaver. I was down there last winter and I saw great trees with limbs and bark that had all turned into stone," meaning the petrified trees of Arizona. "Oh," returned Jim, "that's putrefaction. If you come with me to Yellowstone next summer, I'll show you putrefied trees grown with putrefied birds on them, singing putrefied songs." And I'm sure they got a laugh around a campfire. Well, finally, the government was able to fund a scientific expedition under the direction of Ferdinand Hayden to Yellowstone. He went there in 1871 with a large scientific survey, and it was because of his reports Congress established Yellowstone. You should take note of the fact, though, that the only reason they established Yellowstone is Hayden and the scientists were absolutely positive that there was no mineral resources there and no agricultural potential, or Congress never would have voted for it. Well, subsequent government surveys brought more scientists, and here's one, William Henry Holmes, and he noticed that when you went up the Lamar River, that in the steeper portions of the Lamar River country, that you can see upright trunks standing out on ledges like columns of a ruined temple. These petrified trunks fairly cover the surface and were at first supposed by us to be scattered remains of an ancient forest. What he's saying is these trees that were standing up, they thought were like parts of maybe living or recently dead trees. And when you get up close, you find out they were really made out of stone. So of course, the tourism begins to pick up after the establishment of Yellowstone, the first national park in the country and the world. And people start coming in increasing numbers. Well, one of the ways of enjoying Yellowstone, if you couldn't go to Yellowstone, was looking at it through a stereopticon viewer. This is the result of a camera that has two lenses and makes two negatives side by side, and then they make two prints side by side. And when you put them in the viewer, like you see in the right-hand picture here, you see things in 3 dimensions. These were really amazing. I mean, today they're almost a novelty. Maybe when you were a kid, you looked at a Viewmaster and would go, ooh, wow, you know, it's 3D. Well, this was almost like going to Yellowstone. And of course, they had stereopticon views of the fossil trees of Yellowstone. So that brought people to see these fossil trees as well as the other wonders of Yellowstone. So here's some historic photographs showing that you did what you wanted in Yellowstone. And not only did you do what you wanted, you were encouraged. One of the early superintendents of the park, Philippus Norris, he suggested in 1883 that the tourists should go to Amethyst Mountain, which is up the Lamar Valley, and you'll find all sorts of, quote, fossilized trunks and stumps of ancient forests and et cetera, et cetera. You'll find fossilized wood, opal, agates, amethyst, et cetera. And they can be obtained comparatively easily, obtainable without heavy work with just a pick and a fuse. In other words, here in an official of the Yellowstone Park was telling people to come and bring your pick with you to carve away. And other guidebooks echoed this sentiment. Here is a guidebook called Rambles in Wonderland. And he tells people if you go to the Tower Falls area, there are quantities of silicified, petrified, and agatized wood. And the best place for getting them is Specimen Mountain. And, you know, like these were, just come and pick them up, help yourself. This is amazing. But this was not a very common way for examples of Yellowstone. And a very common process was when you entered the park from Mammoth, you would take a horseshoe and give it to one of these entrepreneurs, and they'd put it in the Mammoth area where the Mammoth hot springs were, and they would get wet, and you would get a precipitation of white travertine on your horseshoe. And 5 or 6 days later, when you came back out of the park through Mammoth, you would pay for your horseshoe. So everybody was taking stuff home, and they were doing that not only with especially these fossilized tree pieces. Well, not only were the tourists hacking the place to death and all the geyserite formations, they were killing the wildlife. Finally, Congress authorized the U.S. Army to take control of the park. It was either that or the park was going to get destroyed. And so the Army came in, they halted the slaughter of the buffalo and the elk, and they started patrolling the park and brought vandalism under control. They certainly didn't eliminate it, but they sure reduced it significantly. And unfortunately, a lot of the fossilized trees that were within easy reach of roads had been taken. And one of the few remaining fossilized trees had a big iron fence around it. So the picture on the left shows who I think is Park Superintendent Horace Albright. And he, in 1951, somebody noticed that the souvenir hunters had ravaged the park so much that the vandalism had forced the Park Service to put up this fence for the one remaining significant tree. And you can see in this picture right here, here's a modern picture of that one really large tree left over. There were a number of others in that area, but they're all gone now. So if you'd like to see this particular fossilized tree and be able to drive up to it, what you do is you go in the park to Mammoth and you head east toward Tower Roosevelt Junction. But just before, a couple miles before the Tower Junction, there's a road leading south. You can see my red arrow there. And it's a asphalt paved road to this fossilized tree. So that's the only fossilized tree you can see within a short distance from your automobile. But if you'd really like to get close to some fantastic ones, you have to hike about a mile or two up Specimen Ridge. And here is what you can see on the top of Specimen Ridge in this fairly short hike, although you do gain, I don't know, 800 or 1,000 feet. You will find a 8-foot diameter rosewood tree. And you'll find, if you look on the right-hand picture here, you'll see there are 2 fossilized trees that are almost like twins. It's really incredible. In this picture on the left, you'll see all 3 of those together. And I want you to notice, maybe it's not possible from where you're sitting, but there's a human being standing here. And so these fossil trees are taller than a person. And here's a picture I took of the big rosewood. And I had 2 ladies sit there to give you a comparison as to how big that fossil tree was. It's almost 8 feet in diameter. It's really incredible. And also in the same hike, in the same area, there's this fossil tree. Here's the 1921 photograph on the left side, and on the right is my photograph. And you notice in the 1921, the tree is alive on the right, whereas the tree has burned up from the fires of 1988. And here's another comparison, the 1920 photograph of the 2 twins. And there's my photograph from 1986. And I just noticed this when I was preparing this slideshow a few years ago. If you see where the red arrow points on the left, there was a big rock there, and now it's gone from when I was there in 1986. So erosion does happen, but you can almost see the roots fossilized underneath the trunk of the tree on that one. And so it's really a fantastic specimen. All of those are in a, you can see all those in just one hike. Not only will you see those standing ones, but there's some recumbent fossilized trunks in that area too. So if you're interested in hiking to those fossil trees, you start out at Tower Junction and you head eastward toward Cook City. And in about 10 miles or less, just before you cross the Lamar Bridge, Lamar River Bridge, parking area, and then you hike. And it's a pretty well-defined trail up near the top, and then you veer off to the right. You'll be able to see all of those trees I was showing you. Well, the park was originally created as a rectangle, as you can see on the inside of that map on the left side there. But in 1920s, Congress readjusted the boundaries. And instead of a straight line on the eastern side of the boundary, they made it follow the divide of the Absaroka mountain range, except down in the thoroughfare corner. But also significantly in the upper left corner of the park, the Gallatin area, they made a little inclusion there that we'll talk about here more. And here's an enlargement of that of that addition. The sole reason that they added that section to Yellowstone was because of the fossil trees. There are a very large number of fossil trees in that northwestern inclusion to the park. The boundary there, you can see on your screen, is this kind of this darker line. And I've gone hiking all throughout this region, up onto the divide there and into the valleys. I took an extensive mule pack train trip into that area to photograph some of the fossil trees. Here's a fantastic 20-foot giant that is in the Gallup, in that same vicinity, a little closer to West Yellowstone. And I've got a picture of one of my friends with me down in the left-hand picture, the colored picture, showing you how potentially tall that is. I call it the 20-foot giant, and there's my photograph of it on the right. It's in a very, very steep area. In the left-hand picture, the tree that you saw in the previous photograph, this big 20-foot giant, is in the background. So below it is another huge fossil tree, not quite as tall, but the ground was so steep and so crumbly, it was too dangerous to get my camera down there to photograph this one from down below. This pyroclastic flow creates a very unstable geologic layer. It's very crumbly, it's full of rocks, and it's so easy to lose your footing. If you look at the right-hand side of the picture, you see how steep it is. In fact, to get down to this lower fossil tree, we brought a 50-foot rope with us, and the rope just helped you keep your balance as you're going down this slope that's just full of these rocks that want to make you slip and slide. And you really don't want to slip and slide. Here are two more photographs of that same area, and there are cliffs below this. If you look on the left-hand picture, I can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different fossil trees just within view of one camera image. So this was quite an area for finding fossilized trees. It was really fun to be there, but it was really half dangerous and you had to be careful. So up on the Skyrim Trail, you see lots of fossilized trees. And as Bill Schneider says in his hiking guide, if you'd like to get high and have lots of panoramic scenery, the Skyrim Loop Trail is the best long hike in the Yellowstone. And you get to see fossilized trees as well as mountain ranges in the distance. It's kind of a challenge. It goes from 6,300 to 9,900 feet above sea level. So it's quite a hike. Here's some more fossil trees that I saw along the Skyrim Trail. On the left, you see the 1921 photograph, and on the right-hand side is my photograph. And if you look closely, and I'm not sure you can see it from where you are out there in the country club, but in this 1921 photograph, there is like a branch, maybe 3 or 4 inches in diameter at the base of the tree. That branch is still there. It's moved a little bit, but it's still there. So you know that piece of wood has been there over 80 years. On the Skyrim Trail, we came to what was called the 3-generation tree. If you look on the left-hand side, or on the right-hand side, you have a huge fossil tree that is about, I'm going to say 5 feet in diameter. And inside it is the stump of a dead tree. And also inside it is the growth of a new living tree. So they call it the 3-generation tree because you have a fossil tree, a dead tree from modern times, and then a live tree that's still there. And if you look in the right-hand side of the picture, you can see how steep the slope is and how I'm sitting on my butt there to take the picture. And I was so afraid my camera or I would start sliding. I had my friend in maroon there stand there the whole time holding my camera because we didn't want to start rolling down that hillside that was so steep. I tell you, that volcanic deposit, breccia, is just really mean stuff. We hiked to this fossil tree, but it was so large and so overgrown with moss and it had turned more of a gray color than what you see in this picture, that I decided not to photograph it. But I think it's one of the biggest fossil tree trunks I've ever seen. That thing has to be 10 or 12 feet in diameter. It was just monstrous. I was assisted in my search for these fossil trees by the park paleontologist, Vincent Santucci. I believe he's moved on to other places now, but he published the first survey, modern survey of the fossils in Yellowstone National Park. And when I was on my Skyrim hike with the mule skinner even found a fossil tree that we were able to photograph. There's my mule skinner on the left, and there on the right is the tree, the photograph of the tree. I remember there was a big storm coming, and I wanted that picture so bad, and I knew I couldn't take the picture before the storm hit. So we waited for about 2 hours for the storm to approach, dump rain and lightning around us on some of the peaks. And then finally the storm moved on and the sun came out and I took my picture. So that's a really special photograph for me, the mule skinner's fossil tree, because the mule skinner found it and then I had to wait 2 hours to take my picture, but I thought it was worth it. One of the telltale signs for finding fossil trees is looking for the light colored pieces that break off due to erosion and then that go downhill. So here's a photograph that somebody else took showing that a good way to find a fossil tree is to look for these pieces littering the hillside. Another way is to go into a stream bed, and if there are fossil tree fragments in the stream bed, you know that somewhere upstream or uphill is a fossilized tree. So we were camped on Specimen Creek, and literally you could wade in Specimen Creek, and about every other footstep you're stepping on a piece of fossilized rock. So here's a photograph, which may be hard for you to see at the country club, but all these light spots here, there's 1, 2, 3, 4. There's probably at least 4 fossil trees, because these fossil trees tend to be very light colored or blonde and ochre colored, and the volcanic material is much darker, so they really stand out pretty well. So I'm just going to cruise through some pictures that I lifted off the internet and from old postcards and things, showing you how extensive and beautiful these fossil trees are in Yellowstone. That's one of the giants. And this is, I believe, is the fossil tree that then got the fence put over, as you see, right? And the picture on the left shows the big magnolia tree that's at the top of the Specimen Ridge. But on the right-hand picture, if you go into the Gallatin National Forest, outside the park, you can find fossilized trees. So if you go up Tom Miner Basin into the National Forest that is just north of the park, northwest corner of the park, in the National Forest there, you'll also find fossilized trees. That's a picture of one in the National Forest. That's a really old photo. I haven't been to that one. And more pictures on the left that somebody took of a fossil tree. I don't know where that one is on the left, but here you see me photographing the 20-foot giant on the right. I photographed it from up above. It was just too steep and dangerous to bring my camera down below. And there's a recumbent fossilized tree. I think that's pretty impressive there. And here's a fossil tree growing right next to, with a modern living tree growing right next to an old fossilized stump. How high do these stumps get? Well, it's a contest. You need to erode away the material that buried the tree, but the top of the tree is also eroding away too. So the only way you can see a fossilized tree is if the base material is eroding away faster than the top of it erodes away. And the one on the left is a fossil tree up the Lamar River. And on the right is another tree. I wish I knew where some of these were, but and there's pictures that I took of two fossil trees. The one on the right there, that's pretty tall. I'm going to say that's a good 10 to 12 feet high. That's pretty amazing. You'd think an earthquake would topple that. I just love the beautiful blonde ochre color of these specimens. And here's one showing the rings. I think that's pretty neat. And this is the stump you'll see on the Specimen Ridge hike. That's the first fossil tree you'll come to. Well, you've had a short lesson there in the fossil trees, but remember in a national park, you can't take any specimen, plant, animal, or mineral. So you have to take the advice of take only pictures and leave only footprints. So I think that's the end. Here's some booklets you can read about fossil trees and the geology of Yellowstone National Park. And I believe that's it. So I'd be glad to take questions.
Thank you very much. Let me see if there are any questions. I'm going to stop your sharing.
Okay.
And we'll try to figure out who all's on here. There we go. Are there any questions from here first? Any questions online? Just unmute yourself and ask your question. Jerry? You got to unmute yourself, Jerry.
I guess I'm unmuted now, right?
Mark?
I just want to comment that the presentation was extraordinary, and his ability to describe the trees and the process were absolutely remarkable. I'm wondering, do pine trees get petrified like deciduous trees?
I'm going to hazard the guess that the answer is yes. But the reason you probably won't find any in Yellowstone is because during that geologic period, it was too wet. It was mostly deciduous trees. So I think in theory and in principle, it wouldn't matter what the species was, but the ones in Yellowstone are mostly deciduous trees.
Thank you.
Because of the origin of the geologic period, it was so warm and wet. Those were the predominant vegetation types.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Monty?
I'm curious about.
I'll repeat it.
I'm curious about the camera that you take all the black and white.
Okay, Monty's curious about the camera you used to take all those black and white pictures.
All right. Good question. When I'm photographing, if people come by, the first thing, several things they ask me. First is that a really old camera? Because it looks like the camera from the 1800s. I bought it brand new in 1989. It's called an 8 by 10 inch view camera. The negatives are 8 inches by 10 inches. And it's designed just like the cameras from the 1800s.
Yes.
But it's basically, I bought it brand new.
I'm watching a program on Zoom now.
I got it in 1989, and I've been using it every year since. I just took 246 pictures with it in Nevada and Utah this summer. The second question is, that people ask me is, are you working for National Geographic? They must assume that the bigger the camera, the more you must be working for National Geographic. No, I don't have anything to do with National Geographic. They're all digital now. So I'm a throwback. I'm like a fossilized tree in the photography world, Why do I keep doing this? If you've ever seen any of my photographs in real life, you will realize the quality that comes from generating a contact print from a large negative. The bigger the negative, the better the quality and the contrast. So that's why I stick with this old monster. It's too big for me to even carry by myself. I always have to have at least one other person, and I prefer another one or two. There have been times when I went to some place to photograph and I was all by myself and I had to take 2 trips. It takes 2 full backpacks to carry my camera outfit. I know I'm crazy.
Okay, Lee, well, thank you very much. That was great, great show.
Oh, thank
Very much
you.
appreciated.
My pleasure.
Next week, our speaker is Juanita Vero, the county commissioner who doesn't come from the city of Missoula. We'll be here again next week. Have a good week, everybody. We'll see you a week from today, if not before.